5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Is that better? There we go. Even I can hear me now.
Governor, welcome to Ashland. Happy to be here.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for being here. It's one of 12, I believe, town hall meetings so far that the governor has participated in here in New Hampshire, more than any other candidate in the race, and we're very proud of that. My name is Wayne McDonald. I have the privilege of being chairman of the Christie campaign here in New Hampshire, and I'm also a former chairman of the New Hampshire Republican State Committee. I'd like to begin this evening by recognizing Henry Ahern, the vice chairman of the Pemmy-Baker Valley Republican Committee, for the purposes of leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I don't know if this next gentleman is here. Bruce Perlow, are you here? I was looking for Bruce Perlow, the chairman of the Republican County Committee, but I'm sorry? It's on. Okay, how's that? You know, one of the disadvantages, the governor won't need a microphone probably, but one of the advantages of going before the governor, if you've ever heard the governor speak, you don't want to follow him. You always want to be ahead of him. So that's one of the things I'm grateful to about this program. But I have the privilege this evening of introducing the governor. And let me just say this, that all of us as Republican voters or independent voters or voters period have a very important responsibility. Every election has consequences. Every election cycle is of tremendous importance, and that only grows over time. And in 2016, as we look at the state of our country, as we look at the state of the world, as we realize so many of our fellow citizens have been unemployed for so long, and many of them, we can't even measure it anymore because they're not being measured. They've fallen off the unemployment rolls. They're no longer eligible to sign up for benefits because they've exhausted those benefits. And unemployment remains very high. We know the economy has been a disaster throughout the Obama administration. Internationally, we know we've lost respect around the world. We've lost trust around the world. And it's going to take strong and decisive and proven leadership if we're going to turn this situation around. I've made my decision as to who I believe will be able to do that. And after tonight, I hope you'll join me in supporting Governor Christie as President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, the Governor.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it very much. I appreciate you taking the time tonight to be with us. And I want to thank Wayne, not only for his introduction, but for chairing our campaign in New Hampshire. I'm really thrilled to have his leadership. And I have brought reinforcements this evening with me in case things don't go well for me. I have the First Lady of the state of New Jersey with me tonight. I want to introduce you to my wife, Mary Pat. Mary Pat. As Wayne said, this is our 12th town hall since January that we've been doing here in New Hampshire. As Wayne said, we've done more than anybody else in this race, and I can guarantee you one thing: no one's catching up. No one's going to catch up between now and the New Hampshire primary because I love doing this. I've done 138 town hall meetings in New Jersey in the 5.5 years that I've been governor. I started doing it very early in my term, and I did it for a really simple reason: that, you know, when you get into a position like governor of my state, you can get really isolated really quickly. You know, you have state troopers with you all the time. You're driving these black SUVs. They take you into the back of every building whenever you go. I've walked through every kitchen of every place in New Jersey. You know, flashlights on dark stairs and all the rest of it, and you show up and you're in the middle of a room like this. It's an unreal existence. And so one of the things I said to my staff early on was, I need to have a way to interact with real New Jerseyans on a regular basis where they get to ask me questions that's unfiltered by the media, unfiltered by my staff, where I just get to look them in the eye, because it's not only the questions they ask, it's how they look at me. I'll be able to tell whether they think I'm doing okay or whether they think I'm off track. I'll be able to stay in touch with the folks that I'm representing every day and working for every day. And so for me, it turned into kind of a quasi-addiction. You know, once I started doing it, I felt like I really needed to continue to do it. And we got tremendous turnout in New Jersey. You know, some nights it would be, or afternoons, it would be 200 people in a room like this. We had town hall meetings as big as over 1,000 people who came. And as you may have seen on some of my YouTube clips, some of the things got a little spirited at times, as they happen to do in New Jersey and as I happen to be, but always in a way that we were talking about things that mattered to people. And so that's why I want to do it here in New Hampshire, not only because you all expect it. You expect it in return for consideration for your vote, but also because I want to get to know the things that are on your mind. And I want to know what you think is important for the future of our country. Because if being governor of New Jersey can be isolating, being president of the United States can be completely isolating. And you need to be able to hear from real people. So that's why I love to do these. And I'm just going to talk to you a couple minutes really quickly about issues, and then we'll get to the important part of the program, which was you asking me questions about what's on your mind. I started off this kind of national conversation we're going to have up here in New Hampshire by giving a speech on entitlement reform. And, you know, a lot of political folks said to me, you are crazy. Entitlements are the third rail of American politics. Anybody who touches it gets electrocuted, and you don't want to do it. So I decided to do something different. I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to hug it. We're going to hug it and grab onto it. And here's why. In this year's federal budget, 71% of federal spending is on either entitlements or debt service. Hear that now, everybody. In a country of 330 million people, 71% of what we spend and borrow to spend every year is spent on entitlements and debt service. This is not the path that we can continue on, in my view, for our country and have this place be the place it's been for us, for our children and grandchildren. Cannot happen. And so here's what we need to do, I think. First, we need to admit it to each other. Now, we know this is true. And the second thing we need to do is to put forward solutions that we can debate and discuss and then come to an agreement on. So I've put forward really specific plans on this regard. We need to raise the retirement age in Social Security. All right, we need to do it. Here's the thing. We're living longer. It's a blessing. And when the quality of our life is better. Those are all blessings. But these programs were developed for folks to die in their mid-60s. And now the average life expectancy for a woman is 83. The average life expectancy for a man now is, I see some of you, Dartmouth just came out for so solvent because here Social Security has been old. You grow old and phase it in over the next 25 effective. I will be 70 old, God willing. The world from Texas, okay? People vote. The second thing I've said is we need to means test Social Security. If assets throwing off $200,000 a year in retirement income, do you really need a Social Security check? I mean, listen, I remember talking to my friend Mark Zuckerberg about this when I was putting together this program. He said, Mark wants to be very specific, right? So he said, Governor, help me understand. What do you exactly mean by entitlement reform? I go, Mark, I'll make it simple for you. You get nothing. Absolutely nothing. You're worth like $36 billion. You're not getting anything, okay? I think that if you've worked hard in this country, you have $4 or $5 million in the bank that's throwing off $200,000 a year in investment income to you, God bless you. This country has been great to you, and you've been great to it. And I know I had a guy at Exeter when I was doing a town hall meeting at Shooter's Pub in Exeter. Yes, I do town hall meetings in bars, everybody. And I find it works great for me. When people start drinking, I get even more charming. I get smarter. It's just unbelievable. It's great. And he yelled at me. He goes, I paid for that. I paid for it. I said, yeah, you did. You did. And I said, but here's the thing. We often pay for things that all we get in return is the security of knowing that if we need it, it's there. Let's take homeowners insurance. All of us own a home. We buy homeowners insurance. And let's say we own our home for 30 years. Every night we go to bed, we know that if a calamity happens, a fire burns down our house, that we have this insurance that will help us rebuild our home. And we go to bed with some sense of security about that. Now, if you own your home for 30 years, and then you go to sell it, and let's say you never made a claim on your homeowner's policy, do you invite the insurance company to the closing and say, hey, by the way, I've been great, I've paid every year, I didn't get anything in return, I'd like my money back? They're like, no. What you got was the security knowing that if you needed it, it would be there for you. Social Security should be the same thing. And we should be willing to make that sacrifice. We should do the same thing about Medicare. Increase eligibility 2 years over the next 25. And for folks who are in the same condition, $4 or $5 million in the bank, $200,000 in investment income every year in retirement. Right now, for those folks, we subsidize their Medicare premium 75%. How about if we only subsidize at 10%? We'll still give you a subsidy. You paid Medicare tax, we'll subsidize at 10%, but not 75%. If you have the money to pay for it, God bless you, pay for your health care. Pay for your health insurance. And that will help to make those two programs remain solvent. And that, along with changes to the Social Security Disability Insurance Program, which, by the way, is going broke next year. The president is going to steal money from the Social Security retirement program to fund the disability program, because in his administration, there have been months where more people have gone on disability than have gotten a job. So we have reforms for that as well to say if you get hurt and you think you won't need disability, first, you must go to a doctor, you must develop a rehabilitation program, and you must execute on that rehabilitation program. And if the rehabilitation program works, we'll give a credit to your employer to hire you back. And if it doesn't work, then you go on disability. They've done that in Europe. It has saved hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and fewer people are going on disability. That seems to be common sense, right? If you're hurt, let's try to get you rehabilitated. And if you can get back to work, let's get you back to work, because that's better for you and your family, and it's better for our country. If we do those things that I've laid out, and there's 12 points, don't look nervous. I'm not going to give you all 12 points. Go on my website, go to chrischristie.com. The 12 points are there. Those 12 points will save $1.2 trillion at least over the next 10 years. And here's the thing. If we don't do this, there's two options: insolvency or a huge payroll tax increase on the people of this country now. And I talked to a young man at the last event I was at. He's in his early 20s, and he said to me, "Governor, thanks so much for talking about entitlement reform, because I pay payroll taxes every 2 weeks, and I don't believe that either of those programs are going to be there for me if we don't make changes." We owe this to both our young people and our elderly. We owe it to our elderly to keep this solvent for the rest of their lives so that we keep our promise with them. And we owe it to our young people who are paying the freight now, that we're not paying for something in vain. That wouldn't be right. You know, I know when I proposed this thing, Governor Huckabee came out and he said, "That's awful. Governor Christie is going to allow the government to lie to us and steal from us." I have a message for all of you and for Governor Huckabee. The lying and the stealing has already happened. You know, Al Gore talked about the lockbox, right? Remember that back in 2000? The lockbox where all the money from Social Security goes? Guess what's in the lockbox of IOUs from the federal government? Stop the lying and stealing. It can, and like that are not. Let's do that. Let's work with each other to do that, and then not only will those programs be solvent, but we'll be able to do other things to make our country better as well. The second thing I talked about here in New Hampshire was tax and regulatory reform. I'm going to go over that really quickly, and then if you have specific questions, you can delve into more depth with me. We need to simplify this tax system. It should only be 3 rates. The highest rate should be 28%, which is what it was when Ronald Reagan did tax reform in 1986, and we had the greatest period of economic growth in the post-war history of this country. And there should only be 2 other rates, and the lowest rate should be a single-digit rate. And we should get rid of most of the deductions. Most of the people in this room do not itemize their deductions, I suspect. Most of you use the standard deduction, because you don't have enough itemization to do all the special interest things that Congress has created for you to deduct. That's for people that are a lot richer than the people in this room. And the fact is, let's just leave 2 deductions left: mortgage interest deduction for your home and a charitable contribution deduction, so we continue to make sure that our charities are supported in this country and can help those in need. Other than that, let's get rid of the rest of them, okay? And we lower those rates down to 28% at the highest rate and a single-digit rate at the lowest rate, 1 rate in between. And imagine you could do your taxes in 15 minutes, right? Here's how much I made. Here's how much my mortgage interest was. Deduct that. Here's how much my charitable contributions were. Deduct that. Here's the number. Multiply it by one of those 3 rates. Put it in. Send in your check and be done. This is the portion of my speech that my father dislikes the most, because he is a CPA. He's 82 years old now. He's retired. But he's like, "Man, I raised you on this. What are you doing?" Like, "Dad, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. There'll always be work for CPAs. Big companies will always need accountants. Don't worry about it." But we need to do that. We also need to get our corporate tax system into line as well. We're the highest business tax rate in the world at 35%. Imagine the country that perfected the free enterprise system is now the most hostile place for business in the world. We're charging them 35%. It's the highest rate in the world. And we double tax. So if an American company opens up businesses overseas and they make money overseas and get taxed where they're making the money, and then they want to bring it back to home, we tax them again. It's like us, a few other countries, in North Korea, for God's sake. That shouldn't be what we're aspiring to. Let's lower the rate to 25% from 35%. Let's make ourselves competitive with the rest of the world. We don't have to undercut the rest of the world because we're America. We still have a lot of other advantages that we bring to the table. But let's bring that rate down to 25%. Get rid of their deductions too, by the way, in that process. If they want a lower rate, let's get rid of their deductions. And then for that $2 trillion, and it's $2 trillion now that American companies have made that they have kept offshore because they don't want to bring it back because they're not dumb. Like, if I keep it over there, I don't have to pay taxes. If I bring it back to America, I have to pay 35%. And you know what's happening, everybody? They're not bringing it back. 35% zero is zero. In jobs, let's the country cannot have crumbling roads and crumbling bridges, and that'll create jobs too. Last piece on regulation. Last year, the Obama administration instituted 81,000 new pages of federal regulation just in the year 2014. It is a record, an all-time record for an administration in 1 year. I spoke to a guy who helps to run one of the local banks in the area, and he talked to me about the regulation under Dodd-Frank and how he didn't have to have a compliance officer before, just dedicated to dealing with the federal government, and that he's being buried in paperwork from the federal government. And he's seeing local community banks in this state, and I'm seeing it in my state, close all the time because they're afraid to give out loans. And who's that hurt the most? It hurts small businessmen and women who aren't going to be able to go to a big bank. Their business isn't going to be important enough to go to the big bank. They used to get their credit lines, their ability to borrow, to expand and grow from the small community bank in their neighborhood where they knew the banker and the banker knew them. The banker probably frequented their business and said, yeah, our bank will invest in you to have you grow. That's getting killed in this country by Dodd-Frank. It's typical of the federal government. We had a problem. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac lowered their standards. We had a bank crisis all over. Instead of just fixing that problem, they saw an opportunity to regulate even more. So they said, well, we'll fix that problem over here, and then we'll go over here and nail all these folks too. We need to end that kind of regulation. So here's what I did as governor, because we had that kind of problem in New Jersey. Believe me, I was preceded by 3 liberal Democratic governors who never found a tax they didn't want to raise. Remember something, in the 8 years before I became governor of New Jersey, taxes and fees in my state at the state level were raised 115 times in 8 years. 115 times in 8 years. And we issued more regulation than you could imagine. So when I came in first day, I signed an executive order that said no new regulation from any department or agency for 90 days. And in that 90 days, I sent my lieutenant governor out to meet with businesses and said, come back with the list of the worst regulations that hurt business the most that they want to get rid of. And in my first year as governor of New Jersey, we got rid of 1/3 of my predecessor's regulations that he put into place. And you talk to business in New Jersey, and it's helped to make it better. We should do the same thing at the federal level. We should put a moratorium on new regulation when the new president comes in. We should set a rule that says if you want to issue new regulation, you got to sunset the same amount of regulation so we don't add to the mountain of it. And the last thing is, this president has loved signing executive orders. And a lot of executive orders that, in my view, have been illegal and overreaching. So during the transition to my presidency, I'm going to have the lawyers go through every one of those executive orders he signed, and on my desk in the Oval Office on the first day will be a stack of executive orders rescinding the executive orders that this president has signed that have overreached his authority. Third and final thing that I'll talk about, and then I'll let you all talk, is I came to Portsmouth to the Naval Yard to give a speech on America's role in the world. And I know that here in New Hampshire, we have so many men and women who have served in our military, served our country, and who understand, both in your gut and in your heart, that the world is going in the wrong direction, and that the world is going in the wrong direction because America has stopped leading the world. Now, I know leading the world is a burden. It is. But you know what? The only thing worse than the burden of leading the world is living in a world with the burden where America doesn't lead. This president tried to convince the country 7 years ago that America was the cause of violence in the world, that our actions in Iraq and Afghanistan were the cause of violence in the world, that if we just pulled out of Iraq and pulled out of Afghanistan and gave some nice speeches around the world, tell everybody that we liked them, that the world would be a safer and better place. And now we've watched what's happened to the world. And it's not just one place. Think about all the places that are dangerous now in the world. In Western Europe, they are scared to death of radical Islamic terrorism, and they've seen their citizens in countries all across Western Europe be murdered by radical Islamic terrorists. In the Middle East, Iraq is on fire, Syria is on fire, Libya is on fire, Egypt is under martial law, Jordan is being invaded by its third wave of wartime refugees, these folks running away from being gassed by Assad in Syria to go to Jordan. We have a war in Yemen. And we have this president who will not stand up to anybody in the world except for Benjamin Netanyahu, right? Right? The only person that this president is willing to stand up to and bark at in public is the head of the government of our greatest ally in the Middle East. This is the same guy who said, if Assad uses chemical weapons on his people in Syria, we will take him out. Now, you can agree or disagree with that policy, but once the American president says it, the American president better do it. And Assad gassed his people, and the president said, never mind. And who wound up filling that hole in Syria? Two sets of people, Vladimir Putin and ISIS. And now ISIS operates out of a large chunk of Syria, and Vladimir Putin is having his fun in the Middle East and now has a foothold. And what's this president spending his time on beside barking at Benjamin Netanyahu? All right, Iran, right? He's in Iran trying to get his name in the history books. Now, he thinks he's going to get his name in the history books for signing a nuclear agreement with Iran. He will get his names in the history books if he proceeds with this, but it will be for signing the worst and most dangerous agreement that any president has signed in the post-World War II history of our country, to allow the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, who funds Hamas and Hezbollah, who screams death to America, and has been screaming it since they took our hostages in 1979 and has never stopped, to allow the mullahs in Iran, who extend no civil liberties to their people, to allow them to have a nuclear weapon is unthinkable. And it will lead to a nuclearized Middle East. Believe me, everybody. If Iran has the bomb, Saudi Arabia is going to get it. The Egyptians are going to get it. The Emiratis are going to get it. The Jordanians are going to want it, because none of them are going to want to be held hostage to the dictators in Iran. And this president's letting it happen. So here's what we need to do. One, we need to rebuild our military. And go on my website, I have spoken specifically about no less than 500,000 active duty soldiers in the Army, no less than 185,000 active duty Marines, no less than 350 ships in the Navy, not the 260 that we're headed to right now. Upgrade the Ohio class of submarines, and make sure we have no less than 2,600 aircraft in our Air Force, not the 50% reduction this president is now headed to. If I know those numbers, so does Vladimir Putin, and so do the mullahs in Iran. And you don't think that's why they're acting out? You're not living in the real world, with all due respect. They're acting out because America is showing weakness. When America shows strength, we don't get into war. When America shows strength, we avoid war, because people know not to trifle with the United States of America. Second, we need to go to our allies around the world and say, listen, there's a change in ownership here. And this next president has to go to our key allies in the Middle East and in Western Europe and in South and Central America and in Asia and say to them, listen, there's a new guy in town. And when I say something, I mean it. When I say I'm going to do something, I will do it. And when I say I won't, I won't. So let's sit down and talk. Let's figure out what our agenda is. And then America will help to lead that agenda around the world so that none of our allies think that we'll abandon them when the polls go down. Because that's what this president does. When the polls go south, so does his commitment to our allies. And so our allies around the world don't know anymore whether they can count on us or not. In the same way, we need to have a new conversation with our adversaries. And notice I say our adversaries, not our enemies. our adversaries. We need to sit down with them and say to them, listen, we want to have a good and peaceful relationship with you. But that does not mean that the United States of America will allow ourselves to become a doormat for any country in this world. And if you want to be part of the civilized world, then act civilized. And if we set those parameters for our friends and those limits for our adversaries, then the world will become a more stable and peaceful place. Not overnight. Not overnight. It will take work, but we can get there. And we back it up with American strength and American resolve. That doesn't mean being the world's policeman. There's a difference between being the world's policeman and being the world's leader. And these countries around the world want America to lead. You know why? Because they know we don't want anything else from them. We're not looking to conquer them. We're not looking to dominate them. We just want a peaceful world where the prosperous can do well, and those who are not prospering have an opportunity to become prosperous. That's the kind of world we want to have. And so that's why I'm running for president, because all of those things need to be addressed. And we need to tell the truth about them. And we need to have an honest conversation about them. And if we don't, everybody, if we just go for the people who look in your eye and tell you what they think you want to hear today, and just want to be loved by you, right? We know those type of politicians. They just want you to love them. Just love them long enough to get in the voting booth and pull their lever. And then they'll do what they're going to do. I'm not that kind of guy. I said in my announcement speech yesterday in New Jersey, I'm not running for president of the United States to run for prom king of America, okay? I'm not looking for you to love me. If you do, that's great, but that's not what I'm looking for. My mother told me a long time ago that if you had to choose between being loved and being respected, always pick being respected. She said, love without respect is fleeting. She said, respect, real respect can turn into love, and if it turns into love, then it's lasting because it's based on respect. Of course, she was giving me advice about dating at that time. But I think it's just as applicable to politics. And in New Jersey, sometimes they love me and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're crowding around me to cheer me, and sometimes they're crowding around me to yell at me. But here's one thing that they know, and one thing that I hope over the course of this campaign you're going to learn, and that is that you may not like every word that comes out of my mouth. You may not like the way I say it every time. You may shake your head sometimes and say, I cannot believe he just said that. But here's one thing you'll never be able to say. I don't know what he thinks. I don't know what he feels. I don't know what he's willing to fight for and how hard he's willing to fight. You're going to know that every time about me. And then you can make your judgment. Because then I have a chance for your respect. And that's what the next president of the United States, in my opinion, has to shoot for. The respect of the American people. And if you get that, you have a chance to get the respect of the rest of the world. And then we can have a world that is peaceful and prosperous for our children and our grandchildren. That's the goal, and that's why I'm running. So now we'll get to the fun part of the program. You get to ask me questions, I get to answer. There are not a lot of rules here. There's just one. You raise your hand, I call on you, and that's it. Someone will bring a microphone to you so everybody can hear you, and I'll answer your question as you ask it. In New Jersey, I have a lot more rules, but that's because it's New Jersey. So we have a lot more rules there, but now we'll go to your questions here. And in New Jersey, when I start to work, I take off my jacket, so I hope you don't mind and no one is offended. Let's start with this gentleman right here. Yep. It'll go.
Are we on?
Yep.
Oops, sorry. Thank you, Governor. I don't know what question to ask you first, how to impeach Obama or how to defend our Constitution. But I think it's the second one. And what you think might be ways we can, or things we can put in place to stop any future president from trampling over our United States Constitution.
Well, listen, the first thing is you have to elect somebody who respects the oath. You know, the oath says, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Preserve, protect, and defend. And so I take my oath very seriously. I've taken an oath twice, not that one, but one that has similar kind of words in it as the governor of New Jersey. And that means that sometimes I have to stand up and enforce laws that I don't agree with. if that's what our Constitution requires me to do. Sometimes that means I got to get in big fights over things that are unpopular, because that's what our Constitution requires us to do under the oath. So I think the first thing you have to do is examine and question people about whether or not they really understand what the role of the president is. You're not a dictator. You're not a king. You're a servant of the people who elect you. And we are all servants of that document that our forebears put into effect and that we have fought for and died for in the 230 plus years since it's been put into place. So I think you just have to look back at somebody's record, see how they've conducted themselves. Here's the problem, by the way, with electing somebody from the United States Senate, or any legislature for that matter. You don't know. They've never had executive authority in their lives. It's like the new shiny toy they get when they get it for the first time. Isn't this cool? What can I do with this? All right? That's why I've said all along, before I was in this race, and I'll continue to say, the next president of the United States must be a governor. Even if it's not me. I mean, it better be me. But even if it isn't, it should be a governor, because I understand both the power and the limits of executive authority. And the majesty that people expect you to use and execute that authority, and the limits that are limited by the words on the document. That's why I've tried to appoint judges during my time in New Jersey who understand that their job is not to write the law. Their job is to interpret the law that's written by the people who are elected. And that's why the decisions of the last week have so disturbed me, because we have courts that are now deciding that they know better. Listen, even if they're right, it's not their right to do it. And so whether you agree or disagree with the same-sex marriage decision, whether you agree or disagree with the Obamacare decision, that doesn't matter. What should bother you is that the court in both those cases has overextended their authority. And even if you like those decisions today, that same court, if you empower it, will make decisions in the future that you may not like. And then all of a sudden, the dancing in the streets that you're doing today may be much different. That's what you have to start to ask people about. Get specific with them. What kind of judges do you want to appoint? I'd be very clear with you. You want to see an example of the kind of justice I would appoint to the Supreme Court? Read the decisions of Sam Alito. Sam Alito, Justice Alito, was a predecessor of mine as U.S. Attorney in New Jersey. I know Sam really well. He's a good, smart man who, most importantly, understands the limits of his job as a justice of the Supreme Court. And if you read his decisions in both those cases this week, you'll get a good idea about the kind of justice that I would appoint as President of the United States. And so those are the kind of things, if you're concerned, as we all should be, about the Constitution, that you should be asking every candidate. What kind of justice would you appoint? What do you think the limits are of executive authority? Have you ever executed it? Do you know? I've done it. I know. And I've used it aggressively when it was appropriate to do it, like during Hurricane Sandy, when I had to use aggressive executive authority to help to rebuild my state, I used it. But there were other times I haven't. When I have to defer to the legislature, even when I don't want to. Those are the limits of our democracy, and that's the kind of thing we should be having a robust conversation about, so you know where everybody stands on this before you go into that voting booth in February and you vote. So thank you for the question. I appreciate it. All right. Yes, sir, right there. He's got.
Dave Moorhead, Plymouth, New Hampshire. What's your feelings about this, the Veterans Affairs and things like that?
Sure. Let me give you a little bit on that. First, for every man and woman who enters the military and chooses in our volunteer Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Merchant Marines, for those folks who join and say that they're willing to defend our country and put their life on the line for it, we make a few promises in return, and one of them is this, that we're going to take care of your health care for the rest of your life. Now, the Veterans Administration, certainly of late, has failed miserably at that. And not only have they failed at it, but worse yet, they've lied about it. And they've lied to our men and women who served our country, and they lied to our taxpayers. They lied about where they were on a waiting list, how many people they were serving, all the rest. So here's the way I think you fix it. The first thing is, when you leave the active military service, you should get a card. And that card should permit you to get health care at any facility any hospital, anywhere in the United States of America. That's the promise we made. And here's the thing. I'm doing things like this already in New Jersey. So let me give you two examples. In my budget this year, we put in an additional $5 million in a partnership with our trauma center hospitals in our state. And it was their idea. They came to me with it. They said, we'll contribute money towards this if the government partners with us, and it's same-day care for vets. And so if a vet cannot get care in a particular day at one of our VA facilities in New Jersey, that veteran can go to a hospital, a trauma care hospital in New Jersey, present themselves, and the hospitals are assuring, under this program, they will get same-day care. And it won't be paid for just by the government. It's in partnership with these hospitals who also want to contribute because of the way they want to honor and support the men and women who have served our military and served our country. And I think it's going to be a great effort and a great program, and I'm hoping that it can be a model for the rest of the country as we work it and perfect it. Second thing is this. I've talked a lot over the last couple of years about a program that got started in New Jersey that was funded by Rutgers University, our state university, and by the federal government. It's a Vets Helpline. And it's for veterans who are having mental health problems. And it is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week hotline that's available to any veteran anywhere in America. And they can call and speak to another veteran and or a mental health professional. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's been funded in conjunction by Rutgers University and by the federal government. Amazingly, this year we found out, this spring, in June, that the federal government was taking budget. Well, to fund it, how much is it going to cost to fund it for every veteran in the one of these veterans, New Jersey, will take care of this for the next year so that there's no lapse in this coverage. And in that time, I hope we'll be able to convince the federal government to step back up to the plate and do it. But I'm not going to allow a vet to have a mental health issue in the middle of the night or in the middle of the afternoon and want to pick up the phone and talk to another vet or to a mental health professional or that. And the supporting me, the Democrat. So in our budget, so there will be no break in service for that vets line that's run at Rutgers University Hospital in Newark. And so any vet will be able to continue to do that. That's an example of the commitment that I have to the veterans, not only in my state, but across our country. And I'd bring that same attitude to whoever I picked to run the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the attitude I'd bring to the Oval Office towards our veterans if I was president.
From Rumney down the street. Will a Christie administration be placing a top priority on the repeal and replace of Obamacare?
Yes. And here's why. It doesn't work. Let's stop the argument about whether it's legal or constitutional or not. Stop the argument. One of the good things that the Supreme Court did is it placed responsibility now exactly where it belongs, with the Congress and the president. No one can dodge this anymore. We can't say, well, let's wait to see what the Supreme Court does. We've seen. So now it's up to us. And I think we need to go to a system that is state-based. I don't think that there can be a one-size-fits-all federal solution for every state. And let's take our two states, for instance, right? Here in New Hampshire, you have a little over 1.3 million people in a state where people are spread out pretty well. Got people up here in North Country. You got people down in the southern part of the state. There's a lot of distance between a lot of the facilities here. And the problem with access to health care here often is distance. Now, in my state, we have 8.9 million people. We're the most densely populated state in America. We're the most ethnically diverse state in America. And we're one of the most urbanized states in America. You can't walk 3 or 4 miles in my state without tripping over a hospital. Okay? They're everywhere. Our problem is not distance. Our problem is cost. Now, why would we think there can be a national system that can effectively and efficiently deal with the healthcare challenges in New Jersey and New Hampshire at the same time. Why don't we turn to the governors and their legislatures to say, it is your responsibility to figure this out. And that way, in your state, if you don't like the solution, you're going to be able to find your legislator, you're going to be able to find your governor, and you're going to be able to make sure they know that there need to be changes. Much more than you're going to find some bureaucrat at Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C., or be able to get to the President of the United States, or with all due respect to your members of Congress, to them either. We need to fix this problem at the state level. And unlike this president, I trust the governors, even the ones I don't agree with, because they're most answerable to the people. And they're most recallable by us, too. Really recallable in New Hampshire when you vote for them every 2 years. I'm glad I'm not up here, man. Running for governor every 2 years would really be something. But the fact is, that's an example of the way we go about it. And I'm going to give you even more details as we go deeper into the campaign, the same level of detail I've given you on entitlement reform and tax and regulatory reform and America's role in the world, and on education reform, which we didn't even talk about in the open because I didn't want to go on forever. But we'll give you the same level of detail as we go forward. But the basis of my plan would be it's a state-based plan. The state has the responsibility to set up access to health care in their state so that it deals with the individual problems that each state presents based upon the makeup of their population, the density of their population, and the location of their population. They're best positioned to do it, and that's the way I would do it in terms of repealing it and replacing it. But one last thing, we cannot be the party that just says we're going to repeal Obamacare. We want to win this election, we got to have a plan to be able to replace it as well. We cannot just be the no party. We have to be a party that also has our own plans and our own ideas that we're willing to fight for, stand up for, and defend. And anybody who comes in here and just talks about repeal Obamacare and we'll figure it out, I'm telling you, that's going to be a loser in November. It is going to be a loser in November 16, and we cannot afford to lose this election in November 16 on an issue like that. And believe me, Hillary Clinton will take us on it. Yes, ma'am.
This is a little bit more on a personal note, a family note. For the past 7 years or so, the Secret Service has been protecting a house in Chicago that's just sitting there. And this Father's Day, the president was off in California and his wife and 2 kids over in Europe. How would your family life be different?
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, you know, since we're getting personal, you know, I made my announcement yesterday, and I'll answer your question. I made my announcement yesterday at my old high school in New Jersey. I went back to Livingston High School in New Jersey, where I graduated from high school in 1980. Now, it's a joke. Here comes the punchline. Don't step on my punchline now, brother. Here's the thing. It's a joke with my staff. Everywhere we go in the country, I'm telling you, somebody comes up to me and says, hey, I'm from Livingston. And it's now become a joke. I grab my staff and go, hey, by the way, another Livingston person. I walk into Ashland tonight to the American Legion Hall, and this guy right over here says, Livingston High School, class of 1961. I'm like, they're everywhere. Stand up, brother, fellow Lancer. And a vet. Yeah, neither was my father, by the way. My father got drafted too. He wasn't thrilled either. So here's my answer to your question, by giving you an example of what Mary Pat and I did when I became governor. When I decided to run for governor, we obviously talked about it. That was back in 2009. Our oldest child, Andrew, at that time was 15 years old. Our daughter, Sarah, was just turning 13. We had our middle son, Patrick, who was just getting ready to turn 9. And our daughter, Bridget, who was just getting ready to turn 6. So we had a young family back then when I first decided to run. And the promise I made to her is that if I won, we wouldn't move to the governor's mansion. Now, we live in the northern part of our state, and the governor's mansion is about an hour and a quarter south of us. And if we move there, it's a great house. It's a great place in Princeton, New Jersey. But Morven's out now. We got a new one, baby. Drum thwack it. Try to say that 3 times fast. But it's a beautiful home, but it would have meant our children would have had to change schools. And what I said to her was, and she said to me, we don't want to do that to our kids. If we win, our life is going to be crazy enough. and they'll be under all kinds of different scrutiny they've never been before. The most normal thing in their life will be where they go to school every day, and that their friends that they had before their dad became governor will be the same friends they have after their dad became governor. They won't walk into a classroom and say, oh, there's the governor's daughter. Maybe I'll be friends with her, or maybe I won't like her because my parents don't like the governor. No, these are all friends that they had beforehand. That's our commitment to our family. And so I drive an hour and 20 minutes every day each way to Trenton from our home. And believe me, some of those mornings when I'm driving, I feel the sacrifice I'm making for my children. But the fact is, it was the right thing to do for our family. Our family will remain as normal as we can possibly remain if this happens. We've sat and talked about it as a family. This was a family decision to do this. And those children now are 21 and 19. So 2 of them are off to college. So my daughter, I will tell you, who's 19 at the University of Notre Dame, is not particularly interested in having the Secret Service with her at college. Not something that not something that appeals to her. And then we have a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old. We're going to try to make those lives as normal as we possibly can for them. This time, they'd have to change schools. This time, there will be differences. And I think it's one of the reasons that Mary Pat, who has had an amazing career for 30 years working in the investment industry, when I decided to run for president, she's left her job. And she's not left her job for any other reason other than to not only try to be here and help and support me, but to provide a sense of safety and stability to our children, to our 2 younger ones, so that they know mom will be home. She's not going to worry about having to juggle a job and everything else anymore. Her main focus is going to be providing stability to those 2 younger children. And then every once in a while, when I can drag her out with me, to have her come out with me to provide some stability for me as well. So that's the way we'd approach family life in the White House. I would love my children to be able to experience everything that this next opportunity would have to offer for them as a member of our family. And nothing is more important in my life or in my wife's life than our children. And that's why when we made this decision, all of them sat around the table too and got to say everything they wanted to say. And then we made the decision together. And so that's the same way we would approach it if we were lucky enough to win this office and to get the chance to live in what one of the former presidents said was the crown jewel of the American prison system, the White House. So that's the way we would handle it, ma'am. Thank you for asking about them. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, Governor.
Yeah.
My nephew would like to ask you a question.
Yeah.
He wants to meet or shake your hand if you
Well,
don't mind.
first come up here and shake hands. What's your name? Cameron. All right. Cameron, you use my microphone. Go ahead. What's your question?
If you become president of the United States, go ahead.
If you become president of the United States,
Help me out.
Would you invite me and show me the White House?
would you invite me
Show you the White House?
and show me the White House?
All right. Cameron, here's the deal. Here's the deal, Cameron. Now, Cameron, this happened when I was running for governor the first time in 2009. I had a young man.
Good evening, Governor. Affordable housing and healthcare are very strongly linked, and studies show that stable housing can lead to a healthier America. But with skyrocketing rental costs and a lack of access to credit for potential homeowners, Americans are forced to choose between seeking medical care and paying housing costs. So as president, what policies would you implement to make housing more affordable to allow Americans to live healthier lives?
Few things. First off, we've gone through an experiment in New Jersey that has been a complete failure. So I'll start with that about what I wouldn't do. In New Jersey, the New Jersey Supreme Court imposed, they said that every town had to build affordable housing in their town by law. Now, what happens then? Right? What happens is that the towns go wild trying to figure out how to do this. The costs become exorbitant. And in the 30 plus years that edict has been in effect, we have built less affordable housing than we would have if it hadn't been there. I think what we need to do is to encourage folks to use the market forces that are available and the partnership with the federal and state governments to make affordable housing available to folks. Now, for instance, when we had the last downturn in 2008, there was a glut of housing on the market and a lot of mortgages that were belly up, and a lot of people that left their homes. And instead of taking an intelligent approach to this and trying to see how could we turn something bad into something good to make that housing that now all of these different banks and in essence the federal government now owned available and affordable to folks, what we decided to do was just to continue to have the argument game in Washington, which led to no progress in that regard. The second thing that you have to do is have a growing economy. Part of the reason why affordable housing is not affordable to folks now is because we have the economy growing at 2% or less. When that happens, while housing prices go down a little bit, your income and your buying power goes way down. And so for young people who want, forget whether it's a rental or to buy a home, you think about what happens to them. Right now, a lot of them that wind up going to college are buried under mountains of college debt. They come out, they're getting jobs in this economy. They're not full-time jobs. A lot of them are part-time jobs, and they're doing more than one part-time job. They're paying off loans, and they don't have the buying power to even get something that would be affordable under other circumstances in past economies. So part of it is a direct thing where we need to work with the states and the federal government when housing is available to rehab it and to make it more affordable. But secondly, we need to grow this economy. If you have an economy that's growing at 4% rather than 2%, there will be housing that's not affordable to you today will be affordable. And so I don't want the government to artificially get in there and hold down prices or the government to go in and say we need to build affordable housing here, here, and here. Having run a government now for 6 years, we won't do it well. You're better off having the private sector be able to do it and have a growing economy that'll help. And in the areas where we've already failed, let's rehab those areas and make them affordable for folks. We've seen that happen in New Jersey in certain cities, in Newark in particular, where we have a lot more affordable housing available now. And it's been a real boon to people. But it's because the private sector has seen it's now profitable for them to go in there and do it. We need to build a profit motive into it. We're the United States. We're a capitalist society. We can't just dictate things. We have to create profit motive for people, and I think we can do that. And we'll talk more later. I'm sure someone's going to ask about student loans and student debt, because that's a big part of what's happening now, too. All right. Yes, ma'am, right here. You take mine.
First of all, Governor, I'd like to thank you for having the courage to speak your convictions and for coming to New Hampshire to see us. And I appreciate the efforts you put into talking about reform when it comes to taxes. And I'd like to see if you have a comment or a suggestion on campaign finance reform.
Yeah, I do. Campaign finance reform doesn't work. Every time we've tried to limit money in politics, here's what happens. We set up another system where it gets less transparent and more money gets involved that we don't know where it's coming from. So all these different campaign finance reforms, McCain-Feingold, all the other ones that have happened since then, they lead to really smart lawyers sitting around reading every syllable of every word and figuring out how to get around it or through it. So here's what I think we need to do. You're never going to take money out of politics, and here's why. We need to communicate to you. And every state's not like this one, where you can get to people directly, you can see people in the eye. You know the old New Hampshire joke, who you voting for? Are you voting for Christie? I don't know, I've only met him 3 times, right? I mean, that doesn't happen in New Jersey, okay? So unfortunately, to communicate to a country of 330 million people, you have to use mass communication tools, and those mass communication tools are expensive. So there's always going to be money involved in politics to try to do that. Here's what I think we should do. We should take all limits off. All limits off, and then there should be a requirement of 24-hour disclosure of every nickel you take on the internet. So that you can go on to my website, if this system were in place, and you could see every dollar I get from every person 24 hours after I get it. And then you can compare that to the positions I'm taking. So if I take $10 million from Exxon, and then a week later, you see me changing my energy policy to be more favorable to the oil companies, you could draw certain conclusions, right? That's what we're really getting at with money in politics, right? The real problem with money in politics is, does it inordinately influence the decision maker? And you want to be able to decide that. It's not that you care how much money I spend on an ad or not. You think to yourself, rightly, if he's getting money from these people, is he being influenced more by them than he is by me? So I think the way to do this is stop all the silly rules, because you see all the stuff that folks go through now. right? You have all these different organizations that are set up that raise money in different pots, and some of it's disclosed and some of it's not disclosed, and then some of it's run by a separate organization, and they say, well, why aren't you, would you pull that ad then? You go, oh, I'm not running that ad. That other group is running that ad, and they're completely independent from me. And you sit there and say to yourself, well, who do I, what window do I go to complain about this? The candidates are no longer held responsible. What you want ultimately is the candidate and the office holder to be held responsible for what comes out of their mouth and comes out of their campaign and by what they accept in their campaign. So if we want that, if that's really what we're getting at, then let's not fixate on how much money each person gives to each person. Let's know about it. So if you take the money, put it on the internet within 24 hours, you can go on your computer, type onto my website, scroll through every person who gives me a nickel, and then you can make your decision based upon who I'm taking money from and how much. And if you think I'm being inordinately influenced by those people, then that's going to give you a clue into my character. And that may then decide your vote or not decide your vote for me. But right now, we don't even know the answers to those questions. And it hasn't slowed down the amount of money, it's increased it. Because now instead of raising it in one place, you got to raise it in 3 or 4. And it just increases the amount of money. And it's lowered the level of transparency. So that's what I would do. That's my campaign finance reform. And remember something. You all remember when Steve Forbes from my state came up here and ran for president a few times, right? I've talked to Steve about this. Steve has said to me any number of times, he had no interest initially in running for president, that he wanted Jack Kemp to run for president. And he said, I love Jack Kemp. And Jack, I said to Jack, let me give you all the money you need to run for president. It was illegal. He couldn't give it to him. Steve Forbes wanted to write the check he wrote for himself to Jack Kemp and let Jack do it. But it was illegal. But then he found out he could write a check to himself for that and do it. So he said, all right, I don't really want to do this, but I need to get our ideas out there, so I'm going to go out there and do it. That's silly. If Steve Forbes wants to spend however much of his money he wants to spend because he thinks that, you are the best candidate for president, well, God bless you. Take the money from Steve Forbes, but make sure that I'm going to be watching, and so is everybody else, about whether you do things for Steve Forbes that you shouldn't be doing or take opinions that you shouldn't be taking. That's what we're really trying to get at. So let's stop all the games, and let's just be honest with each other. That's what the problem is. Disclosure, I think, gives you the opportunity to solve that problem. It empowers you to solve that problem, and that's what I would do. Young lady right there. Yep.
So last year when I turned 18, I voted at the first opportunity that I could, but I had a lot of friends and knew a lot of people that had no interest in voting, and I wonder if you had an idea of how you can begin to pique the young people's interest in their civic duty more.
Yeah. I think it's a really good question, because I was like you. I turned 18 in September of 1980. And so my first vote was on an absentee ballot sitting in my dorm room at the University of Delaware. I got to vote for Ronald Reagan. That was my first vote. And it was pretty exciting. Yeah. And it was pretty exciting. I was really excited about that vote. And part of what drove me to want to vote was because I was really excited about who I was voting for. So the first thing is that candidates have to excite people. Now, listen, I didn't vote for Barack Obama in 2008, okay? I voted for John McCain. But here's the thing. A lot of people in this country were excited to vote for Barack Obama. They were. We remember the phenomenon. Remember the lines and all the rest that day? People weren't talking about bad voter turnout that year. So the first thing I'd say to you is candidates matter. They matter. And we need to do a better job as candidates to excite you. We've got to do a better job of reaching out to you and being ourselves and giving you a reason to want to be excited. I don't believe in all these artificial methods to try to get people to vote. Like, give them 30 days of early voting, Vote on weekends, vote in your house, vote at the corner, vote at the deli. No. Voting, in my mind, is a sacred thing, right? I mean, is it really so hard in this country, right? I mean, the polls in New Jersey are open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., right? Is it really that hard to say to you, hey, can you find 5 minutes between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. on election day just to make your way over to the firehouse or the police station or the school cafeteria or wherever you go to vote and just go and vote? Is it really that hard? I mean, it really isn't. And so we're trying to set up all these artificial things that say, well, if we made it easier, if you could just all vote by mail, if you could do this. I don't have any problem with voting by mail. If people want to do that, I'm okay with it, especially if they're going to be out of town or whatever. But here's the thing. People are not voting because they don't believe their vote makes a difference. And the fault of that is us. You look at what's going on in Congress, you excite, talk to each other, dirty words. In the corner, they stand behind those microphones, wherever that place is on Capitol Hill. I've never been there. You know, where they all walk out and there's that bank of microphones and all the press like Dan Ball standing back there. All those people are standing there waiting to ask them questions. We should ban that place, right? Because they're all like rabid dogs to get out there to get their face on television, right? And to say the most awful thing they can possibly say about the other side. And listen, I've said plenty of awful things about the other side when I think they deserved it. But I also invite them into my office and we work together and we compromise and we produce results too. And our problem in this country right now is the reason young people aren't voting is because we're not speaking to their issues that concern them and we're not exciting them. I've never seen a young person who's excited about politics who ever hesitates to go out and vote. They never have an excuse. They're at college, they either register where they're going to college or they get an absentee ballot to vote where they are at home. They find a way to do it. And in 1980, it was a lot harder to vote. I had to do the absentee ballot application in advance. I had to mail it in by a certain date. Then they mailed me my ballot. Then I had to mail it back by a certain date. I had to go through all that. But you know what? I did it. Because I couldn't wait to get rid of Jimmy Carter. I couldn't wait. And I couldn't wait to see somebody like Ronald Reagan actually be president of the United States. Because Ronald Reagan spoke to me. He talked about an America that possibilities were limitless. He talked about an America where we could lead the world in a way that was responsible. He talked about an America where I was going to get a job. Any job that I could get, because of how hard I worked, I was going to rise up through it. He made me believe that my future was only limited by my own ingenuity and by my own willingness to work hard. And that excited me. And when Mary Pat and I got out of college, we went to college together. We got out of college, we weren't worried about, like, were we going to get a job? We were worried about which job were we going to pick? Which job did we want to do, right? That's what excites people when a politician speaks to them about issues that concern them and that makes them think that their life will be better if that person gets a chance to lead. And so there's all these other things that people want to do. How about our candidates start to do that again? That's what I'm talking about, entitlement reform, because you know what? That should concern and excite everybody. It should concern you. And it should concern the folks here who are on Social Security right now or about to be on it. We got to talk about those things, but they're dangerous to talk about because like the guy at Exeter at Shooters, some people can yell at you. But you know, I'm from New Jersey. It doesn't bother me. So that's what we need to do. That's what we need to do. And all the other stuff, by the way, I think is artificial. And it may help along the margins, but it's not going to change the mind of a person who says, my vote doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. This system doesn't work. So why should I bother? Giving them 10 more days to early vote, it's not like they're going to say, all right, well, maybe 10 days earlier, I might care. No, they don't care. And they don't care because of us. We have to be better and do better. All right. Yes, sir, right here. She's coming right behind you.
Thank you, Governor Christie. My name is John Gruz from Holderness. And I just want to say God bless you. Keep telling the truth, telling it like it is. And I'd like to shake your hand as Jersey to Jersey.
You bet, baby. Another Jersey guy. We're everywhere.
And I'd love to shake your hand as president.
All right. Hey, go see Cameron. He might be able to get you in.
Thank you.
He might be able to get you in. For everybody here, you want a White House tour, if I win, Cameron is your contact. All right? He's your guy right here. This young man here. I'll give you mine.
Thank you for being here, Governor. I know I'm going to have to pay law school debt, but there's a bigger debt that's around 18 trillion, which my generation is going to have to pay off if nothing's done about it. In your first 100 days, in your first budget, how do you intend to tackle it? And for us to rest assured that we're not going to be paying off in the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah, and 18 trillion is probably light. By the time the next president gets there, it's going to be at least 20. And here's the thing: you're not gonna fix it just by cutting spending. It's too big. And so I think you have to take two approaches. You have to restrict spending at the federal level, and then you have to grow the economy. Because you got to fix this problem coming from both ends of it. And anybody who tells you we can cut our way out of this, maybe 30 years ago, not now. Not going to happen. So when I say we need a 4% GDP growth, that's not just because I want to create jobs, and I do. It's because we got to reduce debt. And that's a way to get more money coming into the government without raising people's taxes. And that's the way we need to do it. And it's got to be disciplined at both ends. And we got to make choices. You know, when I became governor of New Jersey, the treasurer came to me my second week in the office, and he said, if you don't cut $2 billion in spending in the next 6 weeks, we will not meet our payroll for the second pay period in March. Now, this is New Jersey, the second wealthiest state per capita in America. We had so outspent ourselves, a phrase that you all will understand up here, we were so out over our skis. Not bad, huh? We were so out over our skis, we were not going to make payroll for the second pay period in March. I had to sit down and I went through every line item in the budget 3 days a week for 4 weeks, because I couldn't take more than 3 days a week of doing this. And we wound up cutting or eliminating 800 different programs in that budget, and we cut $2 billion out. But it was painful to do, but that's what you need to do. And you know what's happened since then? The budget I just passed for fiscal year 16 that I signed last week, it spends $2.5 billion less in discretionary spending than we spent in fiscal year 08. Not like in projected growth. That's actual dollars we're spending. A government is spending $2.5 billion less than it did 8 years ago. We have to discipline ourselves, right? Now, we still spend a lot of money on education, a record amount of money on education. We still expanded Medicaid because in our state, folks needed it, had to have it, and the federal government's actually paying a lot more of it, and we had to do that. We went through and we're spending things on the things that we think are important, but we got rid of a lot of stuff that had just accumulated over time that by the way, every one of those programs had a constituency. Every one of them. I got the emails and the letters and the phone calls from every little group that had gotten that in the budget in the first place. But you got to be able to say no to people. And they protest on the front steps of the State House, and they call you names and all the rest of that stuff. And you have to be willing to let it go off your back if you know in your heart that what you did was right. That's the first part. The second part is you got to grow the economy. Because even if we just do that, it will never catch up. And to be honest, you know, it's going to take a long, long time anyway. But with economic growth at 4% or greater, more money's going to come in. And if you stay disciplined on the front end and don't start spending that money as soon as it comes in, we're going to be able to pay down a good amount of that debt. And so that you're not saddled with a lessened economy and a lessened country because we simply can't afford it. And remember one last thing, everybody, by the $20 trillion in debt, we've got like near 0% interest rates right now. Those interest rates start to go back up as the economy grows, that debt service is going to get bigger and bigger. And what I said before, about 71% of the budget, it'll eat up even more of that. Because right now we're paying near nothing in interest. So remember, we're in a grace period right now. This is the period when we should strike so that we can lower it, so that when the interest rates inevitably go back up, that we can handle it and handle it the right way. So that's the way I would deal with it, and hopefully that'll lessen your burden a little bit. They tell me I can take one more question, which means I'll take two. Because I want to show them that I'm still the boss. Let's go to that lady right back there.
For taking my question. You mentioned earlier on about your tax plan. There are other candidates out there that are talking about a fair tax. How does your plan, is it better than that?
Listen, I think it's better because I do still think that we should be taxing income in this country, and I don't think we should go to a fair tax. Listen, you can have an open, honest debate about that. This is what I believe. And I believe if you make an income tax system fair, if you make only 3 rates, if you get rid of all these special interest deductions that Congress has put in that most people in America don't use, if you do that and everybody believes that folks are paying their fair share, then I think everybody will be fine. I think part of the problem right now is that everybody thinks the tax system is rigged. And the reason they think it's rigged, either by the Congress or by the IRS or by both, is because it is. The American people aren't stupid. They get it. So let's have a conversation about that and fix it. But it's going to mean that there's going to be, like I said to him, there's, every different interest came out of the woodwork when I cut or reduced over 800 programs. When you start getting rid of some of these deductions, every interest group's going to come out of the woodwork saying, oh, no. You should get rid of all the deductions, Governor, except for mine. Mine over here, very important, very special, very necessary for the government, right? So we got to have strength in that regard. And so, there are folks who will have all different kinds of opinions about, some people go for a completely flat tax of one rate. Some people talk about a value-added tax. There's all different kinds of people and different approaches. And folks can get up here and make an argument about it. And then you have to decide which one you think is best. And you have to decide, can that person get it done? And then third, you have to decide, is it my most important issue and the issue that I will decide my vote on, right? Well, you go through those 3 things and then make your decision. I believe this is the right way to go because I do think people like the idea that folks are taxed based on their income and that there's a fairness to that the lower you make, the lower you pay, the more you make, the more you pay. I think people believe generally in a progressive tax system, but they want to make sure it's fair and they want to make sure that, they understand it. Because when we don't understand something, at least from where I come from, if somebody's taking money from me and I don't understand exactly how, I almost always figure I'm getting taken for a ride, right? So, and I think we feel like the government's taking us for a ride. And that's not even to get into the crazy things that are going on at the IRS in general. And a political agenda-based IRS is a dangerous place. Because you know what? It's true. Everybody's afraid of something different, except everybody's afraid of the IRS, right? Everybody's afraid of the IRS, man. You do not want the tax man coming to your door in anything but a smiling and happy mood, right? So we need to get a system that people think is fair. Then I think people will comply with it in a way that brings more revenue into our government and also gives us a sense in the country that economic growth and opportunity is available to us. And so I don't think the fair tax is a bad idea. It's just not my favorite idea. All right, let's see. Let's go to this gentleman right there.
Governor, what's your position on term limits?
I am completely for them and always have been. And here's why. I have them. I'm the governor of New Jersey. I'm allowed to serve 2 consecutive terms. That's it. I can't run for re-election in 2017 if I want to. I am constitutionally prohibited from doing so. You know what that tells me? I am not indispensable. Okay? Here's the problem with members of a legislature and members of Congress. They begin to think they're indispensable. Only they have the wisdom to be able to represent the 1st congressional district of whatever, right? And think about it. Why are there term limits on almost all the executives in this country, but no term limits on most of the legislatures? You want to know why? Because the legislatures make the law, right? So in my state, for instance, I've got term limits, my legislature doesn't. That leads to a guy who has been a predecessor of mine. He was an acting governor when Governor McGreevey resigned. He was the Senate president. He has been in the legislature in my state for 41 years. Now listen, nice guy, I like him. He's a Democrat, so I don't agree with him on most things, but here it is. Go home, man. Go home, it's 41 years. All right, seriously. Someone out there has got a better idea after 41 years. I don't know what it is, on what subject, but go home. The world is not going to stop spinning if you're not a member of the New Jersey legislature. Yet they feel that way. So and then how about the folks who say, there are term limits. They're called elections. Baloney. Because the way, both at the legislative level, at least in my state, and at the congressional level, the way they gerrymander these districts, you ever look at what a congressional district looks like now? I mean, look at that. It's a dinosaur. No, wait, it's a congressional district. I mean, the way it's shaped, the way they draw it to protect the incumbent, right? They draw it to protect the incumbent. So, you know, what does that lead to? It leads to them being there forever, first off. Secondly, it leads to a lot of dysfunction we have in Congress, right? Because if you draw a district that's a Republican district, the Republican member never worries about the general election, right? Because he knows or she knows they're going to win. Same thing with the Democrats. What do they worry about only? They only worry about the primary then, right? And so what do they do then? They say, let me go as far to the right as I can so no one can get to my right, and then I'll win every primary. And then the Democrat goes, I'll go as far to my left as I can, and no one can get there. And they can't even see each other anymore by the time it's done. And then they go down to Congress, and why don't we compromise? Because God forbid, they might offend somebody in their district for a primary, and then they might get primaried out. It's their only job risk. So term limits fixes a lot of those problems. Gerrymander the district all you want, man, but you're only there for 12 years. And then you're going home. And that's the way this country used to be. That's the way it was set up. You were citizen legislators, right? Although I do like what you do here in New Hampshire, right? You pay them like $100, right? That gets them to go home too, right? You know, $100. You know, in New Jersey, they get a lot more than $100. But even that at times won't do it. So I think if term limits are okay for a governor, if term limits are okay for the president, term limits should be okay for Congress, and term limits should be okay for a legislature. No one is indispensable in this democracy except for the voters. So, all right, now, I know I only said two more, but there is one man who looks completely desperate in the back. He was like raising his hand. He had a look of desperation on his face. We do not want to leave anybody desperate tonight. So you have a question. I'm ready for you, buddy.
I want you to finish that. How about the judiciary in term limits?
Oh, term limits for the judiciary? Yeah, well, here's the thing. Here's what we do in New Jersey, which I don't think is a bad idea. When I nominate judges, any judges, and the governor in New Jersey nominates all judges with the advice and consent of the Senate, whether it's a Superior Court judge or a Supreme Court justice, they get an initial term of 7 years. And then after that initial term, the governor has the choice as to whether to renominate them or not based upon their record. And if you renominate them and they're confirmed a second time, then they get lifetime tenure. But I can choose not to renominate them if I don't want to. And I did that with a couple of Supreme Court justices since I've been governor, where I did not reappoint them. That caused quite a stir in my state. It was the first time it was ever done. Our Constitution, our new Constitution came into effect in 1947 that had those rules. It had never been done since 1947. Every governor had always reappointed and given lifetime tenure to Supreme Court justices. I twice refused to do that. And so I think that's an interesting system to consider because it works in New Jersey. It gives the elected folks an opportunity to evaluate whether you have actually performed on the job the way you said you were going to perform on the job. And if you have, then you get lifetime tenure. But if you don't, exactly right. It's about accountability. And I think the system in New Jersey has worked pretty well. And, you know, the governor then has the responsibility to use it. I'm the only one who has. But I think maybe I've set a precedent, hopefully for others in the future, that if they don't believe that that person has executed their duties in a way that was appropriate, then they're going to make those decisions too. I hopefully have broken the ice on that for decisions in the future. But that's one thing to consider because what we want from our judiciary is we want them to be independent, but we don't want them to be unaccountable. And there's a difference between independence and being unaccountable. And so I'm not for election of judges. But I believe if you put a system in like that like we have in New Jersey, that puts in an element of accountability without having judges run for office. That, to me, is not the right thing to do. I don't want to turn every judge into a politician, God forbid. Maybe they already are a little bit, but you know, we'll give them the the benefit of the doubt. But that's the way I think is a good system. I think the system in New Jersey's worked pretty well. So let me wrap up so I make sure I get everybody out of here at the promised time, including me. So first off, let me thank you for coming. One of the things that I love, as I said at the beginning about these town hall meetings, is I get to know what you're concerned about. And some of the questions tonight I could have anticipated, and some of them I didn't. But I hope what you saw tonight is that I'm going to answer your question. I'm not going to answer the question that I wish you had asked, or I'm not going to try to evade your question. I'm going to tell you what I really think. And I think that's what we need to do in this country. We need to start telling everybody what we really think and take the risk that someone may disagree with you. My town hall meeting last night, a guy asked a question, first question out of the box, and I could tell from looking at him that he didn't agree. Like in the beginning, he was just like kind of, his eyes got a little narrower as I was talking, and then he totally gave it up. He just went, okay, 0 for 1. Let's go to the next question, right? I mean, it's okay. He now knows where I stand, and I know where he stands. That's okay. That's what this whole process is supposed to be about. So I love doing these things, and I really appreciate the fact that you all have come, and you're willing to spend your time on a Wednesday evening to spend time with me and with Mary Pat to hear what I feel about the issues that face our country. So thank you for being such great citizens and being willing to participate in this. Secondly, I've told you about a bunch of issues tonight, and you can go on my website and see much more, and as we go forward, you'll hear even more. And that's really important for you to know, as I said before, not just hope and change. All right? When this time, we better know a little more than that, okay? And I think that's important. But the other element that I hope will inform your judgment about who to vote for in our primary in February is that you'll feel like you know a little bit about the person and who they are. Because you can't anticipate every problem, every question, every issue that's going to come across the president's desk in the Oval Office. You just can't. Nobody can. And so what happens then? You have to have faith and confidence in the character and the principles of the person that you voted for. And then you have some faith that maybe they'll make the right decision by you and by the country, right? And so you shouldn't be having a poll on everything. You should know what's in here. So I'm going to end by just telling you a little bit about who I am, because I think you need to know that if you don't already. We all are defined, right, by our mother and father. Whether we like it or not, whether it's good or bad, whether we went onto a psychiatrist's couch to talk about it or not, no matter what it is, we all are defined by our parents. That's where we come from and who we are. Now, I have an Irish father, and I had a Sicilian mother. Yeah, okay. Right. I hear that. Yes, I hear you. Here's the thing. You know what that means for those of you who are snickering. It means that as the oldest child in that family, I became an expert at a very young age at dispute resolution. Right? Now, I want to say that my mother was argumentative because that would be disrespectful. But what I would tell you is that she just never found an argument that she didn't think was worth having. And you know, she had a bunch of different slogans in our household growing up, and one of them was, no suffering in silence. You got a problem, tell us. You got a complaint, say it. Don't tell me later, I didn't say it, I didn't know it, say it. And by the way, the first practitioner of that rule was her. So when she had a complaint or a grievance or anything else, she would start saying it. And when we got a little bit older, we were getting a little nervier and we were ready to push back a little bit, I'd say like, Mom, enough, all right? I hear you. I know you're not happy about that. I don't want to hear it anymore. She said, no. You keep quiet. She said, you're going to hear it now. I need to get it off my chest. There will be no deathbed confessions in this family, Christopher. You're hearing it right now. And that's the way she lived, and those were the rules that she enforced on all of us. All of us. And so, you know, I tease my father all the time. He's this wonderful 82-year-old, affable Irishman who's got a smile, and if he were here tonight, he'd be walking around telling you really embarrassing stories about me, and he would hug all of you, and that's just the kind of guy he is. But I teased him all the time, you know, Dad, in the automobile of life, you were merely a passenger. Mom was the driver. She drove the family. She set the rules. She enforced the rules. And so people ask me all the time, like, why are you the way you are? Why are you so blunt and you're so direct and you say exactly what you think? And if somebody is yelling at you at a meeting and they're being unreasonable, you say, sit down and shut up. And that makes national news somehow, right? You know, or if a hurricane is coming and you see people on TV 24 hours before the hurricane and they're still on the beach, you know, putting suntan oil on each other, you say, get the hell off the beach, and somehow that makes national news too. But it's because of the way I was raised. My mother said, don't suffer in silence. My mother said, you got a complaint, say it. My mother said, you got something on your mind, tell me. And that's the way I was raised. That's who she was. And as I was growing up, I didn't know what the value of that really was. I really didn't. Your mom tells you, so you kind of do it most of the time because she's your mother and you have to listen. And so I did it. But as I got older, I began to understand the value of it more and more. And finally, as I got to be an adult and got married myself and had children myself, I started to learn the value of it. And then, as I said to you, my dad's 82 years old. He's retired and is doing really well and was at my announcement yesterday and was, I don't know, I can't even imagine how he really felt, to watch your son say he's going to run for president of the United States. It had to be a pretty great day for him. And I said, I had a Sicilian mother because my mom passed away 11 years ago. And she was a lifetime smoker, and she got lung cancer. And she got diagnosed on Valentine's Day of 2004. And I was U.S. attorney at the time for New Jersey. And at the end of April, I was off in San Diego at the national conference where all the U.S. attorneys get together once a year. And my younger brother called me. I have a younger brother and a younger sister. And my younger brother called me and he said, listen, mom's taking a real turn for the worse. We had to put her back in the hospital and she doesn't have much time left. So if you want to see her, you need to come home now. And so I got on a red-eye flight that night from San Diego. I flew home to New Jersey overnight. I arrived at Newark Airport at 9 o'clock in the morning. I got my car and I drove to the hospital where mom was. And for any of you who've gone through this, who've lost a friend or a relative, loved one to cancer, you know what it's like at the end. And they had started to give her morphine. And so she was in a lot of pain and she was near the end of her life and they were trying to make her comfortable. So I sat there and she was asleep for a while I was sitting next to the bed waiting for her to kind of wake up. And so finally she woke up and it was so typical of my mom, right? She had not seen me for a week. And she woke up and looked at me and no hello or how are you or how was your week or how was your trip? She said, what day is it? And I said, it's Friday. And she said, what time is it? And I said, it's 9:30 in the morning. And she said, go to work. And I said to her, hey, Mom, no, listen, I took today off. I'm taking today off. I'm spending the day with you. So don't worry about work. I took today off. She said, Christopher, it is a work day. Go to work. Like, Mom, are you afraid of not getting your taxpayers' money's worth today? I'll make up the time. Don't worry about it. And she looked over at me. She grabbed my hand. She said, Christopher, go to work. It's where you belong. There's nothing left unsaid between us. It was one of the most powerful moments in my life. She looked at me and was giving me permission to let her go. She knew it was the end, and she was letting me let her go. And I looked at her. I said, okay. And I gave her a kiss on the forehead, and I went to work. And that afternoon, she went into a coma. And she died 3 days later. It was the last conversation I had with her. And it was incredibly empowering, but more than that, it was instructive. She turned out to be right. As much as it galled me, she turned out to be right. There was nothing left unsaid between us because of the way she had taught me to be. Every grievance had been aired. And on top of that, she also knew that I loved her. And I knew how much she loved me. We didn't need to do it then. It was done. It was done. And it was so great to have that feeling. And so when people ask why I am the way I am, I live that way because that's the way she taught me. And her life and her death told me that's the right way to live. And so I know that if she were alive today to see this circus that my life has become, right? She'd say a lot of things to me, but I know there are two things she'd say for sure. The first one is she'd say, okay, so you're running for president of the United States. Don't get to be too big a big shot with me. I changed your diapers. I know you. Don't act big shot with me, buddy. She would want to keep me grounded. She would want to keep me to be the young man she raised. And I know the second thing she would say to me is, okay, if you're going to do this, you're asking them to trust you in a way that they don't trust anybody else outside their family. You're asking them to give you the most important vote they can possibly give to be the leader of their country. And so if you're going to ask them for that, you better tell them exactly what you're thinking and exactly what you're feeling. There better be no surprises. You better tell them what you think and what you feel. In a trusting relationship, that's what you do. And so that's the way I'm going to be. And that's the way I'm going to run this campaign. And so some days it may lead you to go, oh, I cannot believe he said that. Or I can't believe he said it that way. Some days I hope it leads you to say, I'm so glad someone finally said that and said it that way. But here's one thing you'll never say. Between now and whenever my campaign is over, and if I win, whenever my service as President of the United States is over, you'll never say, I don't know what he thinks. I don't know how he feels. I don't know what he's willing to fight for, and I don't know how hard he's willing to fight. You're going to know all those things. You're going to know all of them, and you're going to know all of them every day. That's the promise I make to you as I start this campaign, and that's the promise I make to you if you give me the honor and the privilege of being the 45th President of the United States of America. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm running. That's why I'm fighting, and that's who I am. Thanks for coming tonight. I appreciate it.